suppose you can have a run of bad luck, or you can have a run of good luck rather, and then it always comes to an end, doesn't it, in some way?
I suppose it does, yeah.
And for Gerry Hutch, there was some run of good luck in that he was acquitted on murder charges by the Special Criminal Court. Then he was, of course, visited in Lanzarote in his home by police from the Guardia Civil and taken to court there. He was actually jailed for a period of time before he got bail and came back to Ireland. Went for election, nearly got it. We call that, what would you call that?
Well, a high point. Well, I suppose it depends on your perspective, but a high point, I'd say, for him. To performed like he did. Exactly.
So now we hear that he is now facing a Criminal Assets Bureau bill, which relates to, do you remember the Bureau, members of the Bureau were in Lanzarote for that arrest, which happened in October of 24?
Yes, because there was simultaneous raids. There was raids on his home in Lanzarote, and a cab officer was there. But there was also raids in his home in Dublin as well, which he spoke about when he came on the podcast and was very frustrated about, to say the least. And cab were, I think, involved in both of those operations. And documentation was one of the main things taken in both locations. So Gerry Hutch was arrested in Spain for, under the allegation of money laundering. We don't know how that case...
He's still before the courts on that case, on bail. There's no charges yet been levelled, but that's the way it happens in Spain. You're brought to court and you're sort of... It's a charge, but it's a kind of an investigation charge rather than an actual criminal charge.
Yes,
but that's where he's at with that. But it appears that, whether they were working in tandem or whether it's all connected, the new bill to the Criminal Assets Bureau totals 800,000. That's the demand he's been given.
Which is a huge amount of money for anybody. I suppose it's interesting, if an Irish citizen is arrested in Spain, there's no reason the guards might get a notification or whatever, but they wouldn't routinely be involved in it. So it does show that there was at least cross-border cooperation with this, the fact that a cab officer was there. So he's been hit with an €800,000 bill. There are a number of ways in which cab can...
There's two distinct ways.
There's two distinct ways, yeah.
They bring a proceeds of crime case where they demand an amount.
Yes.
And they might identify assets that they can seize or that would make up that amount. Or they can take, and it's really old school nearly, those revenue cases, which was quite weird because they would hit somebody with a tax demand for unpaid taxes against monies that they were believed to have gathered illegally as such.
Well, I mean, so I suppose the difference was that in a proceeds of crime case, the state will go to court and say, this money is the proceeds of money of drug money, for example, and that they'll say they'll look at all of the revenue that the person could get legitimately, and they can add it up and say that doesn't come from that. The old revenue cases, and they still bring, I think, cases involving social welfare and that sort of stuff. They're not saying this money is money that's the proceeds of crime. What they're saying is it's we can't prove that, or we're not commenting on that, but what we are saying is this person hasn't paid the correct amount of tax on the money that they're generating. Now, obviously, it's the Criminal Assets Bureau, so there's a reason why they're bringing these cases, but that would be the basic difference.
Well, the first time the Monk was hit with a cab bill, it was a revenue tax demand.
Yes.
And he paid and settled it.
He paid and settled it. And of course, if we look back to Gerry Hutch's history, there was obviously, he was linked to these two multi-million euro bank robberies that he, of course, has said to us directly that there's no proof of his involvement. But obviously he was still regarded as the prime suspect, no doubt about it. So that generated millions, and there was obviously court cases where sums of money gone into bank accounts in Uri and all were linked to Hutch. And then also we know, and we know this as well as a fact, that whatever money he did have got invested in the property market. And that as the Celtic Tiger kicked off, his property investments became hugely profitable. So either way, there was this huge sum of money. there, and CAB looked into it, and what their conclusion was, maybe proceeds of crime cases were certainly less common then, but they certainly said, well, you haven't paid the corrected taxes on the amount of money you have, and then they hit him with a bill.
And he settled it. And as this happens in civil proceedings, if somebody comes to the table and offers an amount, that will be the end of that case. And in a way, with those old revenue cases, it felt as if you settled a revenue case, say, for example, with the Criminal Assets Bureau in 2004, 2006, it looked as if you did a clean bill of health up to that point, because you were then paid up on your taxes as such. But this latest 800,000 demand relates to the years between 2006 and 2010, so a 4-year period. And certainly people close to Hutch feels that he's furious about this, as he will often be whenever there's any legal activities around him. In actual fact, he was so furious about that, the raids on the house in Lanzarote and the fact that the Gardaí were there. Did he not tell us there was about 7 members of the Gardaí, because he made some joke about them wearing anoraks?
They were wearing anoraks in the heat, and he did make jokes about it. But of course, 800,000 euros is not a joke when you're hit with that amount. So if you look back at the original CAB court case, eventually it was settled, but there was a really lengthy legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was a monumental struggle, actually. It was one of the big struggles that CAB faced in its early days. Some of the key criminal figures that were targeted, like George Mitchell and John Gilligan, they all put up huge resistance to these CAB cases. And Gerry Hutch, I think the figure that eventually was settled on was 1.2 million, which was to cover back taxes and interest for a 9-year period. But at the time, Felix McKenna, who was the detective chief superintendent, he said that Hutch had been involved in the Merino Mart robbery and the Brinks robbery in 1995. But definitely, Gerry Hutch settled that bill. He moved on. He set up his own. What was it? A taxi firm?
Yeah, cab company. Yeah.
Yeah. What was it called? It was called Carry Anybody, which stands for CAB, CAB, which he claimed was a coincidence. But nonetheless, he did look like he'd got off clean. Now, obviously, then, we're not fully sure how it works, but you go back, that bill is settled in terms of revenue, but I think it suggested that the CAB retained an interest in him and had an oversight of his earnings.
What's happened is, since 2016 and the Regency hotel attack, which is 10 years ago now, coming up, that what happened was all the resources of the state were actually focused on both the Hutch criminal organisation and the Kinahan organisation. The Kinahan organisation were not so much here anymore. They were abroad, and that has been a very lengthy process, because the Gardaí have had to work with their their Spanish, and in more recent times with authorities in the United Arab Emirates. But in relation to the Hutch organised crime group, there was plenty of activity around them as well, between Garda investigations. Obviously, the Regency investigation focused on that grouping, and more recently, James Mago Gately, who's an associate of the Hutches, he was relieved of his
home is
primary home,
went up for sale,
and I think it was sold
this week.
This week, yeah. So obviously, when the decision was made, this crackdown decision was made in emergency circumstances in 2016. The state didn't take sides in that grouping of the Kinahans and the Hutch. While the Kinahans looked like the larger organisation, the wealthier, the more powerful, the state had to see both of them in the same light, and has been ongoing tackling both of them with all their resources, including the Criminal Assets Bureau. So this is a culmination of what would have started in 2016.
Yeah.
And it's big news that the CAB are back on the Monk's tail, really.
It is big news, and it's, if you're to look at the dates involved, I mean, you have to wonder, is that their final job?
Well, 06 to 2010, the Monk would have been largely still based here in Ireland. I mean, it was around 2013-14 that he migrated more full-time to Lanzarote, where he had a home on the island over there, as well publicised. And I think 2013 was his 50th birthday party, and he had a big shindig, big knees up there. Lots of people from Dublin travelled out to it, but he really sort of stayed more outside the country from then on. So 06 to 10, he probably, if you dug down into it, was possibly the limo years, was it? I can't remember exactly.
I think the limo ended at some point, but certainly the property market would have still been something that he was heavily invested in, by all accounts.
For sure. Anyway, no doubt it will eventually come on the list, and the Criminal Assets Bureau list, which shows up in the High Court on a monthly basis, and the case will be listed on that. So we will wait and see what the CAB have to say.
Yes.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.